open it up to opens, and I think last week we left it that we might talk about CodeQL today, but I don't remember what else there was.
I think we were going to hold CodeQL to next week. At least the discussion with like Felix and the broader discussion there. I do have an update I can give on CodeQL if we are ready for that, or it can wait.
Sure, go ahead.
So there's two ways to run CodeQL. The main way we've been running it is through LGTM, which is kind of like the enterprise thing around CodeQL that you upload results to. You can view results and download them and all that kind of stuff there. That's what we've been doing in our pipelines, and that's what the GitHub project is doing. The other thing I've been playing around with is using what's called the CodeQL CLI. So that's just using the local command line tool for CodeQL. And I've been able to generate a CodeQL database of our EDK2 build locally. So I think that from what I've found in my experience so far for developer scenarios, I am thinking that that's probably the route we'll want to go. It takes a while for results to get uploaded to LGTM in general. They say it's up to 24 hours, and I've seen that that's actually true in most cases. So for faster turnaround and being able to have the file paths match what's on your local file system, which is actually turns out to be kind of important whenever you go to fix issues. Because CodeQL outputs its results in these files called serif files. It's like a standard static analysis result, like file format. And whenever you view the serif files, it will tell you what CodeQL alerts you have and what files they're in. It's much easier to fix things if those file paths line up to what you have on your system, because you can, for example, there's a serif viewer for Visual Studio Code, and whenever you open the serif file with that, you can just click on the file names and the errors, and it will take you directly to the file and the line of code that has the CodeQL error. So it makes it very easy for you to click around between the errors, go and fix things, and then submit them. And that experience can work with a database downloaded from LGTM, but it's much more straightforward, I found, to generate it locally and do that. And in addition, it gives you the ability to play around with your build settings and run CodeQL queries against your particular build variations that you're trying to do, depending on what you change on your command line. So I guess the point is, I think that the local build's probably going to be a path that we want to go with. And then one of the options that we have for doing that within the Stewart tools is there's this concept of build profiles. So at least within the Stewart build tools, my rough thinking was we could have a build profile that would set up the environment necessary to be able to run CodeQL CLI and generate a database locally. So if someone wanted to do that, they would say, build profile equals CodeQL. And then that would do all the things that need to be done to generate that database, which isn't a whole lot. We'd obviously probably want to pull down the CodeQL CLI as something like a next step, similar to how we do for other tools that we pull in today. And we would only have to do that if you have that profile enabled, and we could figure out the logistics around it. But I guess the main thing I wanted to share is that it can hook into our build process. The database looks relatively accurate from what I've seen so far, hooking around it. And I think that'll be one of the options we end up going with.
Yeah, I actually think it's a very critical feature, just because the code changes required to address some of the issues noted by static analysis are not always obvious, and sometimes it's a bit of trial and error to understand what it really wants.
Right.
You know, even though all the different variations you're trying are functionally, you know, sound, it's about, you know, satisfying the static analysis tool in some cases. And so I think what you've highlighted there is really great. The other thing, I just have a quick question. What does it do for an incremental build versus a full build? Does it, if you only modify one file, does it only run CodeQL on that incremental build of that one file?
So from what I've seen so far, it doesn't work for incremental builds at all.
Okay.
So that's just been maybe there's something that can be done to tweak it to make that work, but they're pretty explicit in the documentation that they expect whenever you're hooking it around a build process that it needs to see the whole process. And I did verify that. I did try it on some incremental builds and it didn't work. So I didn't look further than that.
Okay, I think that's important information to help set up the steward command to know that you have to do a clean build, you know, when
Yeah.
you're this. Okay.
Yeah, that'll be part of the stuff wrapped up in the command is they'll just throw the clean flag on as part of that. The user will, I think as part of the profile documentation, we'll mention that happens as well. The other thing you can also do is instead of cleaning, you can output the build output to just a new build directory, which is equivalent to a clean, and then you don't blast away the old build directory. Because it's not like you really care about your code QL build output. You just need it to go to a clean folder so it doesn't do an incremental build. So another option is we could just send it to like a code QL folder in the build directory instead of the debug, you know, or release _ toolchain directory. But anyways, I think those are things we can figure out in the implementation. I see that you had your hand up, Eric.
Yeah, it looks, I've never used CodeQL before. This is the first time I've heard about it. Sounds like it helps you discover how to fix vulnerabilities, or can you give me like a 1-minute pitch for it?
It builds up a database around your code and your code flows and other things. And then once you have that database built up, you can run what's called queries against it. And those queries are written in the CodeQL language. So they have these they're files that have .ql extensions, and a lot of them are open source and made available by GitHub because GitHub produces CodeQL. And there's a GitHub repo that has a lot of the queries on it. What you can then do is you can so once your main goal is you need to build a database, and then you need to run queries against that database. So the cool thing is once you build the database, then you can run whatever query you want against it. You can run one that you really care about. You can run 100, right? And you don't need to rebuild or do anything. You just keep running it against the same database. And they put together these packs of queries called query packs, and you can just run a query pack against the database. So what my idea is right now is there is a set of there's a set of generally there's a set of queries that are generally considered important for security in C++ and C. That set of queries I'm putting together into a query pack and taking some out that don't apply to EDK2. And I'm thinking that will become our query pack that we will use against databases that are generated. And it'll find, it'll be a consistent set of queries to find vulnerabilities within our code.
Okay. Can you give one example of a vulnerability that you could find using this tool?
The most common one by far is people not checking null inside functions.
Oh, okay, so you can search then, say query, find all places where a pointer is used without being checked.
Yeah,
and you're saying, and then discover that through not just a single function, but all the places that it flows through.
Yeah, and so the main advantage that you get with this is the database builds up an abstract syntax tree of the code, and the queries are run against that abstract syntax tree. So that simplifies the query a lot. So you're not having to like say, I need to go find functions. It already found the functions for you. You don't need to say, I need to find local variables and functions. It already does that for you. So your query can just literally focus on what are you trying to find? Like, are you trying to find local variables that are not initialized? Okay. Like, it already knows all the local variables and it already knows which ones are initialized and not initialized. So all your query becomes is find a local variable and it's not initialized, done, right? So it abstracts a lot of the parsing and a lot of the like the syntax tree of the code itself, so that the queries focus more on like what you're trying to find out of the code rather than dealing with building a bunch of scaffolding and parsing logic and all that other kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, my impression from hearing this and what Michael's described is some of us are used to using tools, static analysis tools like Coverity or Clockworks, or there's even a static analyzer built into the Clang compiler that we've discussed. So it has similar features to that, but it is an open source project. And unlike some of those other things that are products where those rule sets are maybe, hidden underneath the covers and maintained by that within that product. Here, it's an open source project, and the rules can be customized, extended, enhanced, or suited to your project, which gives us a little more flexibility.
Okay, that clicked. So you're it's another option instead of having to use a commercial tool. Okay.
Yeah,
That's the primary reason, besides the transparency and the flexibility, something like Coverity, you can't see what it's doing under the hood, right? And you have to pay for it potentially, or they could change things or change their licenses, right?
Right.
Okay.
And this is the CodeQL repo. So you can see it's a public repo. It's hosted by GitHub. And inside here, you'll find the queries. So if you go to like C++, this is where a lot of the ones that we're using come from. And you can see how they're structured. So they have best practices, things that are critical, things that are likely bugs, and different sets of queries, right? And so you can go into these and you can go into these .ql files, and this is the actual query itself. And often whenever you write a query, you'll write a help file to go with it. And so whenever people load the query in something like LGTM, or they're running like the help command on the command line or whatever, they can get help information about what it does. But if you go to the .ql file, you can see this is a query, right? And what this one is doing is it's finding it's called dead code function. I haven't looked at it before, but it's finding a function that is never called. And you can see there's not very much code here, right? It seems like if you were to try to do this in a different language and you were to manually try to do this, there would be quite a bit of code. But in this case, you can kind of see how they're leveraging all of the abstractions available to them to be able to do this check.
Yeah, this is really readable, or at least compared to something you'd write in Python. So when it uses items that are emitted by the compiler and the linker, so I assume is it specific to certain compilers that support certain interfaces, or?
I think it can hook on to different compilers, and so the way that I've found that it integrates with our system best is to hook it around the build commands themselves. And so whenever you before you start running it, there's a way to start what's called tracing with CodeQL. And so you essentially just say, okay, I want to start tracing, and that means it's going to start looking for compiler commands and other things being run as part of a build process. You run the build, it hooks onto those automatically and gets the output because it knows how to read different tool chains output. And once it builds up, then it builds up its database at the end, and you're good to go, and you call stop tracing. So it's kind of a very it's very unintrusive. It just kind of hooks around what we have, and that flexibility, I think, is what makes this somewhat successful, because it's not a lot of work to hook it in. It's mostly just wrapping around your existing process, and our process is pretty abnormal. So it's still able to hook,
yeah.
so it's still able to figure it out and build up the database, which is great. So yeah, that's just like a quick overview. I didn't want to take up too much time this week, other than just to say that'll probably be one of the things that comes up, and there will be more details about it in the presentation.
Yeah, I just had, I guess, one question. You may answer this in the presentation next time, but I assume you can handle protocols pretty well. Okay, using the search syntax, you could, for example, like a protocol may appear to be unused because in the scope of a single compile, but if it's used in some other module, right, then it actually is being used, right?
That gets very tricky. Depending on your goals, you might be able to figure something out. The problem with protocols is they're dynamically bound, right? So
yeah,
it by nature, you're essentially throwing a pointer into a global database and saying, whoever needs this, find it and make use of it. And because that's done at runtime, it makes it by nature almost impossible to do statically with tools like this.
Yeah, we really struggled with that with SonarQube, and we never found an answer. So
yeah.
Okay,
I'm not saying this will solve every class of problem. It's just it's another interesting tool to have right in the toolkit. So whenever you're thinking about ways to leverage static analysis types of checks, this is another way to consider doing it.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it from our firmware perspective is individual PEIMs, Dixie drivers, UEFI drivers, and SMM drivers that are statically linked against a number of libraries. That single component that does that static link operation, this type of analyzer has visibility to that. Anytime that it uses an external interface outside of that PE-COF image that's generated for that one component, it doesn't find issues necessarily between those separate PE-COF images.
Yeah, that's a common complexity point, as we know from the Rust work and other things.
Thank you for taking the time to explain that. I appreciate it. Cool tool. I'll have to look more at it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Any other topics for the day?
Michael, I think you mentioned that there's going to be a minor update to the Uncrustify formatting tool, and I think you had targeted that after the stable tag, which I know just occurred today. What is there a timeline for getting that update done?
I can do it tomorrow, probably. I've already done it in Project Mu. To be honest, I kind of use that as a testing bed to verify that it behaved as expected. I've already run it across EDK2 and Mu and other code bases, but I just wanted to double check before sending it out. So everything looks fine. So I can probably send that tomorrow, and it won't have much of an impact. The main goal of it is to, like I said, it's to make certain certain expressions within parenthesized pieces of code be formatted properly. There were cases where if you had embedded parentheses before, things could get a little out of control in terms of the formatting not being adhered to completely. And this is very rare. It's a specific case of these types of things. So I think it'll be clear whenever I make the update and you see the few number of code places that are updated, you'll probably look at those and go, yeah, that's how it should have been originally. And there won't be many of them. So I'll just need to run it against the code, get those updates ready, and then I can switch us over to it.
Sounds good, thanks.
The other thing, since we're on plugin related things, I do have the debug macro check plugin ready to go. So right now I have it in review for, again, I'm going with the idea that I'll get it in the project view first, confirm the behavior, and then I'll send it out to EDK too. But if you'd like to look at it, I can send a branch that has the code if anyone's interested early on. Otherwise, you can just wait for my patch series to come out in EDK too.
Michael, have you talked about the requirement for Python 3.10?
I didn't talk about it, but I sent a patch for it. Oh yeah, that's actually a good reminder. I sent a patch on the mailing list for updating us to 3.10.6. I don't think I've gotten any feedback yet on it, but we need to make that move soon. Because if you remember, we were stuck on 3.8, and the fix went in to 3.10.6. That's the first version of 3.10 or 3.9, really. Anything greater than 3.8 we can pick up. And so if we were to make a move off 3.8, this is our chance to do it. I've made a PR, and the PR works fine with 3.10.6.
Yeah, I'm in favor of doing it now. Now's a good time because we just finished the stable tag.
Okay. I think, yeah, that PR is still up and active. So I think whenever you guys are ready, just send the reviewed by and we can merge that one in.
Okay. I guess anything else? Is there anything now that the stable tag has landed, Mike, that we should be focused on?
If anybody's got big changes that are kind of wider, bigger impact scope changes, now's the time to put those in as opposed to the small fixes. So if anybody has any of those, let me know. And especially if it's something that's targeted for the next release, which is 3 months from now. So get those into the queue so the community's aware, whether that's tool related from here, or big features for platforms or core.
Okay. All right. Well, if we have nothing else, we can call it a day. Was there any feedback from last week's presentation? Any thoughts around GitHub services?
I think they're all great, Sean. Just need to keep working on the details behind it. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily just you and Michael. I think that can be a group activity to help fill in some more details.
Yep.
So, I mean, I guess what I notice is that there's a whole bunch of areas, right? It's not just one thing. It's like 10 things that need some attention in there. I'm curious from your perspective, do you want to break out some ownership of some of those different areas so that we can kind of put a full proposal together?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be great. I guess I'm trying to still figure out where to share the document and have interactive collaboration and discussion. Is there any good ideas on that?
Let's see, when we like for the code review change, we opened a separate discussion for that. And I don't think there's been any interaction from there, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I guess post in multiple places is the best I can suggest. You can try RFC and Devil and a discussion and kind of put it in all three areas so that you get the widest coverage of people reading it. And I think you've got yours in the format of a PowerPoint, and I think we recommend that you do that as a PDF so everybody can look at it equally.
Okay, I will try to get that out in the next week or so. All right, if there's nothing else, we can end early today. Thanks, everyone.
Right, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.